Shalom, shalom to all my fellow brothers and sisters out there. It's me again, Damian Powell from YeshuaSavesAll.com. Peace be to you in the name of our Father, Yahweh, and our Master, the Son of Yahweh, Yeshua HaMashiach. So today, my fellow brothers and sisters, we're going to be talking about no cooking on Shabbat. No cooking on Shabbat. So the reason is, a year ago, I uploaded a brief video on YouTube regarding a correction to a previous message about food preparation on the Shabbat, titled Important Questions for Shabbat. And in this brief correction video, I explained that I no longer keep food warm using a crock pot on the Shabbat. And just to be clear, cooking food on Shabbat was never an option to begin with, nor the use of a microwave. So, I would just like to give a little more detailed explanation as to why I no longer use a crock pot to warm up food. And also, this is for those who who say it's acceptable to cook on the Shabbat. All right, so the first thing is, we'll go to Exodus chapter 16, verse 23, in the Aramaic Peshitta. In the Aramaic Peshitta. And it came to pass on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one person. And all the elders of the congregation came and told Moses. Moses said to them, "This is what Yahweh has said. Tomorrow is a day of set apart rest, a Shabbat to Yahweh. Bake that which you will bake today, and cook what you will cook, and that which is left over, keep it cold for yourselves until the morning." That is the key. Again, bake that which you will bake today, cook what you will cook today, and that which is left over, keep it cold for yourselves until the morning. Verse 35, and the children of Israel did eat manna for 40 years until they came to an inhabited land, and they did eat manna until they reached the border of the land of Canaan. So, the traditional interpretation of this scripture was not to cook on the Shabbat, okay? But that strict interpretation has come into question over the past few years, and many are allowing it and saying that it's permissible. But praise Yahweh for revealing the emet, the truth, through the ancient texts, like the Aramaic Peshitta and the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? And as we can see, Moses told them not only to gather manna, but also to cook and bake whatever they would be eating for the Shabbat. So in other words, they would already have it prepared, so that they would not have to cook it on Shabbat, which means it will require a fire to do so. Now, furthermore, Yahweh gave twice as much manna on the 6th day, which is why we call it preparation day. He gave twice as much manna on the 6th day so that they wouldn't have to gather it on the 7th, to truly show that he wants his children to completely rest on the Shabbat. Okay, so he has already given us the pattern to follow, which means that we need to prepare everything on the 6th day before the sun sets. The weekly 7th day Shabbat is a Shabbat Shabbaton. Again, the weekly 7th day Shabbat is a Shabbat Shabbaton. Yom Kippur is a Shabbat Shabbaton. And we already know that it's a day of fasting anyway, right? But it's a Shabbat Shabbaton. And also the Shemitah year, the 7th year, the Shabbat rest for the land is a Shabbat Shabbaton, right? So these are complete stopping, complete ceasing from all activity. So if it's complete ceasing and complete stopping from all activity, then how can we cook on it? You see, these days are completely, they're different than a high Shabbat like the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where we can cook. You see, there's a difference. And that's why he gives us instructions concerning like the first and seventh day of Feast of Unleavened Bread, because it's a high Shabbat. He says you can cook, that is all you may do. We don't get that instruction for the Shabbat, the weekly seventh day Shabbat, Shabbaton. Okay. Now, this also occurred for 40 years in the wilderness so that they would truly get the point. Okay. Every seventh day, they knew what to expect. 40 years. Now, Jubilees and the Zadok priests in the Damascus document, the ones who lived at Qumran, agree with what is written in the Aramaic Peshitta. Okay, so firstly, I know anybody who's been on this page long enough knows that I've been reading from Jubilees and Enoch for a while. I've already said that they were in cave number 4 where the Torah was found, pretty much the Tanakh, okay, the Old Testament. I believe it was the Torah, Psalms, Jeremiah found in cave number 4, and also Jubilees and Enoch were found in cave number 4, okay? And also, I want to read this to show what is the book of Jubilees inspired? Is it authoritative? Torah.com says this, quote, what is Torah in Second Temple? In Second Temple text. In the Second Temple period, Torah was not limited to the 5 books of Moses. The book of Jubilees and the Temple Scroll saw themselves as Torah. Okay? So one thing that I want my fellow brothers and sisters to understand is that the formal book of what is called canon of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, was canonized by the Pharisees in about 200 AD. Okay, so they said these are the inspired books. And they took all the rest of them and said that they're not inspired. Okay, so just some information right there that Torah.com is correct. So, Jubilees chapter 2, verse 29. Jubilees chapter 2, verse 29. Declare and say to the children of Yisrael the Torah of this day, both that they should guard Shabbat on it, and that they should not forsake it in the error of their hearts. In the error of their hearts. It is not lawful to do any work on it which is unseemly, to do their own pleasure, and that they should not prepare anything to be eaten or drunk on it. And it is not lawful to draw water or bring in or take out through their gates any burden, which they had not prepared for themselves on the 6th day in their dwellings. Hallelujah. So, preparing food on the Shabbat is an error of the heart, because the desire of man is to do what pleases the flesh. Okay, which is honestly is why Paul talks about in Galatians 5, we have to be led by the Ruach, the Spirit, because the Spirit wars with the flesh and the flesh with the Spirit. We have to be led by the Ruach HaKodesh to overcome the desires of the flesh. Okay, so it's an error of the heart, because the desire of man is to do what pleases the flesh, and the flesh wants to make the Shabbat just like the other 6 days. And like I said, that's why I went into the explanation about Shabbat Shabbaton versus a high Shabbat. We can't make the weekly 7th day Shabbat just like a high Shabbat. Okay? You can't make it like the other, even like the other 6 days. Okay? So, which produces justification to violating the Shabbat. An error of the heart is a perfect explanation from Jubilees, because we have already been warned about the heart, haven't we? Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, chapter 17, verse 9 in the Aramaic Peshitta says, the heart is stubborn above all things. Who can understand it? So if the heart is stubborn, then that would lead into the error of the heart to do what you think is right and ends up violating a commandment. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12 in the Aramaic says, there is a way which seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. So it may seem right to do something, But if it goes against Scripture, what do we know? It is incorrect. It's wrong. Okay? Which is why we go back to the ancient text to interpret things. We don't go to modern day Judaism and try to figure these things out. Okay? The ancient text is always going to get us back on the right path. Jubilees chapter 50 verse 9. You shall do no work whatsoever on Shabbat day except what you have prepared for yourselves on the sixth day, so as to eat and drink and rest and keep Shabbat from all work on that day, and to Barak, bless Yahweh your Elohim, who has given you a day of feast and a set-apart day and a day of the set-apart kingdom for all of Yisrael is this day among their days forever. No matter how anyone tries to define what constitutes work, Jubilee says that cooking is work. This goes completely against anyone who is saying that they can cook up beef bacon, eggs, grits, biscuits, freshly squeezed orange juice on the Shabbat. It's a violation. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines prepare as, the meaning of prepare is to make ready beforehand for some purpose, use, or activity. So now let's go to the Damascus document, or the Covenant of Damascus. Under the section titled Shabbat Laws, it is written, chapter 10, verse 22. Let no person eat anything on the Shabbat except what he has prepared before the Shabbat. That matches what we just read in Jubilees. That matches Aramaic. Now let's go look at the same chapter, same verse in the Penguin Classics of the Damascus document. No man shall eat on the Shabbat day except that which is already prepared. If it's already prepared, that means you're not cooking it. The Zadok priests who follow Yahweh completely follow the exact instructions that Moses gave to the children of Israel in the wilderness, and what is written in Jubilees. And I'm going to give a footnote from Stephen Farad on page 98 of his translation of the Damascus document. He leaves a footnote on page 98 and says, quote, 10:22, that's the Covenant of Damascus, that's the verse, except what has been prepared before the Shabbat. Food preparation could not take place on the Shabbat, but had to have been completed before the Shabbat began. For the same rule, see Jubilees 2:29 and Jubilees 50, verse 9, which we just read. This may be based on the manna story, Exodus 16, verse 5 and verse 29, in which the food for the Shabbat day was delivered on the sixth day. So even in his footnote, he's connecting it back to Exodus 16, the account, cook what you would cook, bake what you would bake. But we see that in the Aramaic, it says, leave the rest cold to the morning. We see it written in Jubilees and the Damascus document that that's what they did. Now, he says, this may be based on the manna story, Exodus chapter 16, verse 5 and verse 29, in which the food for the Shabbat of the seventh day was delivered on the sixth. Then he goes and says, Josephus in the Jewish Wars, chapter 2, verse 147, speaks on the Essenes. And I want to say the Essenes, the scholars call them the Essenes, but they are the Zadok priests, the Levites, and the converts of the way. They were not Essenes. They were Zadok priests, Levites, and converts to followers of the way who joined in with the Levites and the Zadok priests. Okay, so he says, Josephus in Jewish Wars, chapter 2, verse 147, speaks on the Essenes preparing their food on the day before the Shabbat, so as not to have to kindle a fire on the Shabbat. Another witness. To not have to kindle a fire on the Shabbat. Cook what you will cook, bake what you will bake, leave the rest cold till the morning. Now, let's look at another witness from the Samaritans, okay? In the Samaritan Torah, the Samaritan version of the Torah, All right. On page 204, Benjamin Sadaka, who is the translator of the Samaritan Torah, explains how the Samaritans observe the Shabbat. And he says, quote, 31:14, referring to Exodus 31, verse 14. And you are to keep the Shabbat, for it is set apart to you. Till present times, the Israelite Samaritans have kept the Shabbat as it is written in a very strict way. Again, as it is written in a very strict way. And I've quoted before, I believe it's on the Passover video, that there was a rabbi who quoted about the Samaritans, how they kept the Torah even more exact than the Jews did, which I thought was interesting. Okay, so again, as it is written in a very strict way, on Friday afternoon, preparations for the Shabbat begin, including washing, purifying the body, changing the weekday clothes to Shabbat clothes. The clothing for the men includes a long sleeve floor-length robe in different colors, thick for the winter time and light for the spring and summertime. It is tied with a belt, the same material as the robe. When entering the synagogue, heads are covered. The priests wear red turbans on weekdays and white turbans on the Shabbat. The women of the family, along with the children, prepare the Friday evening meal. When the Shabbat draws near, meaning sunset, the cooked food is taken off the stove and covered by a thick blanket. Then let's go over to page 206. He states, young boys and girls begin to read with the group around the age of 7. At the end of the reading, hot drinks, and he puts in parentheses, stored in thermoses before Shabbat. Again, at the end of reading, hot drinks stored in thermoses before Shabbat. And pastries are served. Afterwards, the people retire to their Shabbat morning meals, prepared by the women. This meal consists of a large variety of cold salads, unquote. So, this again is a direct match with Exodus 16:23 in the Aramaic. Bake that which you will bake today and cook what you will cook, and that which is left over, keep it cold for yourselves until the morning. The Samaritans' interpretation and observance of the Shabbat matches what we read about the Qumran community in the Damascus document and what Josephus said about them not kindling a fire on Shabbat for food. We see the Samaritans take the cooked food off of the stove before the Shabbat, okay, and they cover it with a blanket to keep it warm, okay. And if they want a hot drink, it is liquid that has been kept warm in a thermos. Notice they didn't put it in a microwave. Notice they didn't put it on a stove. It was sitting in a thermos. Okay, and if there's any doubt about their interpretation, we clearly see again that he says that they eat cold salads on the Shabbat. That again matches keep it cold for yourselves until the morning. So, there's a warning in the Damascus document. Chapter 12, verse 2 through 3 says this. Anyone who is controlled by the spirits of Belial and teaches apostasy/rebellion shall be judged as a necromancer or wizard. Anyone who leads people astray by teaching them to defile/profane the Shabbats or festivals, and those who follow him should not be put to death, but instead it is the responsibility of the order of the sons of Adam, meaning the custody of men, to watch him. When he is healed of heresy, he should be watched for 7 years, and then allowed back into the congregation. 7 years. Cooking on the Shabbat profanes the Shabbat because it is work. And those who teach others to profane the Shabbat are viewed, according to the Zadok priests, as heretics, necromancers, and wizards. Okay, and not just them, but those who follow them. So it's not a light matter. And then we go to the Damascus document, chapter 1, verse 18. These seekers of smooth things chose deceit and loopholes in the law. Seekers of smooth things are those who are lax and lenient in their interpretation of the Torah to appease the flesh. One thing we have to keep in mind always is 1 Yochanan, chapter 5, verse 3. And I'm going to read it from the Aramaic. For this is the love of Elohim, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not difficult. They're not difficult. Our Father Yahweh has provided us now with ancient texts. We really know there's no excuse anymore for any misinterpretation of the scriptures. We see how our ancient ancestors have done it, the righteous Zadok priests. So it can't be a coincidence that Exodus 16:23, Jubilees, the Zadok priests, and the Samaritans all agree that there is no cooking allowed on the Shabbat. And we have witnesses against warming food as well. So let us return to the ancient path and put our desires aside on the Shabbat. There are plenty of delicious foods that we can eat cold or room temperature, okay? Salads like we saw the Samaritans eat, subs, cakes, cookies, sardines, smoked fish, fruits, vegetables, and more. There's plenty to eat. And of course, that's not an exhaustive list, okay? There's plenty of creative ideas out there. So be led by the Ruach HaKodesh. And as always, I pray that this helps. My Father Yahweh Barak bless you in Yeshua HaMashiach's name. Shalom.